The big vacation week here in the States, I'm happy to see how many attendees we have on the line today. But I guess I'm not too surprised given the importance of today's topic, which is selecting the right web CMS in 2016. But before we get started, my name is Rebecca Martin. I'm a business development manager here at Real Story Group, and I have just a few quick things to cover. First, for those of you on the call, as a follow-up, we're going to be passing along the slides for your reference. For the subscribers on the line, an archived version of today's webinar will be made available to you. And then finally, if you do have any questions as we're moving through the presentation, just feel free to type your question up in the question window and we'll be sure to address it. All right, so let's get started. We're now, as I mentioned, over halfway through 2016. We see 4th of July in the coming forward here. And as you're formulating or I guess refining your digital strategy plan moving forward, you're going to want to make sure that you have the right web content and experience management foundation in place. And what I mean by the right technology is that it's based on your organization's unique needs and use cases. Too often I'm having conversations with people who say, I wish I would have known, or I would have talked to you last year when I was going through this huge technology selection process. And I guess I'd say with that as a backdrop, I'm confident that this webinar is going to be a valuable use of your time. You're going to leave here with a deeper understanding of the current marketplace. We're going to explore future trends, outline some of our best practices, pitfalls to avoid for a successful web CMS product selection. So it's time that I introduce Tony Byrne, our founder of Real Story Group. He's the original author of our web content management research, a former journalist, and a 20-year technology industry veteran. So with that, Tony, we're excited to have you back for a second week in a row. Thank you for that, and I'll turn it over to you.
Great. Thanks a lot, Rebecca. It's wonderful to see many colleagues from around the world joining in today. It's such an exciting topic because, I've been following web content management technology for close to 20 years now. I think I started playing with this stuff in 1996, certainly as an analyst for the last 15 years. And I'm always impressed and slightly amazed at the degree of innovation that's happening in this space. And I think 2016 is turning out to be pretty different from 2015. And so the choices that you want to make as a customer are evolving as well. So we're going to try to give you, as Rebecca mentioned, kind of a snapshot of where we are today, but also thinking a little bit going forward as well. Now, a number of you are new to Real Story Group. We're really a different kind of analyst firm. We analyze the weaknesses and strengths of the tools and the vendors, but since we only work for you, the customer, our research is known for being, I would say, a little bit more technically detailed and certainly more hard-hitting. And for those of you who subscribe with us, you know that we can advise and mentor you on successful technology selection and also increasingly help you benchmark your digital effectiveness so you can compare yourself against peers and develop really practical roadmaps going forward for digital transformation. We cover a variety of digital workplace and marketing technologies. The one we're most interested in today is web content and experience management at the top, but you know that also relates to a number of other tools, including digital asset management, certainly marketing automation, sometimes overlaps with portals and so forth. So a lot of different potential technologies can come into play here. I'm going to focus today primarily on web content and experience management, but hopefully some of these lessons will be useful for you regardless of the type of digital engagement technology that you may be selecting in 2016. So this is a takeoff from a friend of mine, Martin White, on the famous, or I should say infamous Gartner Magic Quadrant. He calls it the mystical quadrant, and it was really the Magic Quadrant that had me found CMS Watch, which was the precursor to Real Story Group in 2001. I was implementing some of these tools, and I thought that there was such an incredible gulf between what the Magic Quadrant said that they could do and who was a leader and who was a laggard, and what was our real experience actually implementing these tools. And so decided that there had to be a better way for sort of looking at these sorts of technologies and understanding how to sort through the different complexities. And it can be complicated, and so a lot of you, when you're out there selecting technology, it often comes down to this. You just sort of, okay, you do some research and then make a decision on a wing and a prayer. And we see this depressingly often, even among larger enterprises. For example, is a very common way that people end up using SharePoint as a public-facing web content management system, which no one in their right mind should ever recommend that you do, but it's out there. And so a lot of this just comes from people sort of working on a wing and a prayer. And today I'm going to suggest a more methodical and structured approach to doing this right. So the key topics here we're going to talk about is, first of all, the complexity spectrum, which I think is probably the most definitive way to understand the marketplace. But then look at the marketplace itself, then examine how fragmented it is, why is it fragmented, how do you make good choices. Hone in on key usability and architectural issues, then highlight ways that you shouldn't select WCM technology, but then focus the last 10 minutes or so on what's the right way to select. And as Rebecca mentioned, you can use the questions tab in the GoToMeeting control panel to ask any questions or share any comments or anything that you disagree with, and we'll definitely have time at the end to interact a little bit here. Okay, so this is maybe the most important thing to think about with any enterprise technology, but particularly I think with web content management technology, is that there's a spectrum of complexity here, ranging from platforms and even sort of toolkits and frameworks on the left side to things that are very productized, very out of the box on the right. And it's not that one is better than the other, it's just that they're different, right? So platforms are going to cost you more, but are going to be functionally more rich. They are going to be more complex and have more time to deploy, but have potential long-term upside for you if you can master them. Whereas products you can typically deploy faster. Very often tools that are more productized you can get in kind of multi-tenant software as a service in the cloud. It works today. It works quickly. It delivers common capabilities in a simplified way. But sometimes having a product means having to say no, that there's just something it doesn't do and can't be done. Whereas platforms, it's more like how much time, money, and painkillers do you have? You can get platforms to do whatever it is that you need. And this is really the most important sort of continuum to look at and to place yourself and understand the implications of what it is that you're buying. And what we're discovering, in fact, as more and more people do use our Real Score tool to do their own effectiveness assessment on WCM, is some of the scores are actually coming in pretty low, particularly in not-for-profit and higher education. And that doesn't mean that that people aren't being effective at all. It's just that I think that there's a perception backed now by data that there's a long way to go in terms of internal capacity building. And so I encourage you to check out this tool yourself at realstory.com/realscore and just see where you stand with your peers in terms of your effectiveness, which is roughly a proxy for how effectively are you going to be able to exploit this technology. And then that can sort of help you place maybe where you should be on this spectrum. So let's get back to this spectrum again. And what we've done here is grouped vendors into essentially how platform-like are they versus how out-of-the-box or product-oriented are they. To be sure, these are buckets. Analysts like to put things in buckets. There's a two-dimensional view, so it's not getting into things like license model or regional footprint or type of technology like it is Java or .NET. But this is the complexity spectrum. So starting on the left, you have upper range platforms. These are, in many cases, almost sort of toolkits that you use to develop custom content-based web applications. There's a series of legacy platforms underneath that: SharePoint, OpenText, HP, now part of OpenText, Oracle, and so forth. We call those legacies. We have internally at RSG, we sort of refer to them as the aging dinosaurs. These are typically tools that may have come from vendors who do quite well with respect to document management and perhaps portals, but not so great anymore as far as web content management. They tend to be more tools that you leave rather than you license. Then, like I say, there's this broad mid-range in between where you have mid-range platforms and mid-range products. The distinction we make there, again, is just grouping roughly by complexity, which means richness and power, but also cost and potential time and level of effort to implement. if I was going to put a line down the middle between products and platforms, on the platform side, you definitely need dedicated developers. On the product side, you might be able to get away without actually having a dedicated developer. And then the simpler products are actually quite popular right now, and for very good reason. That there's many people who have simpler needs and want to invest in a simpler and lower cost solution to take them where they want to go. So the key thing here is to sort of understand, first of all, in the marketplace, where on this spectrum do you fall with respect to your own capabilities and budgets and ambitions, and being really realistic about that. Now, when we help people build shortlists, we typically don't say, okay, we're just going to only look at mid-range products. It could be that that's where someone's placed, and so we would want to maybe take 3 or 4 from there, but then we also might look upwards towards 1 or 2 mid-range platforms, and then downwards into on the simplicity scale here to look at a couple of products as well. So you may have a sweet spot here, but you also, in the early stages of your investigation, you want to sort of push a little further up the complexity scale, and then also look a little bit downwards towards the more product side of of the equation. And in general, if a simpler product will suffice for you, that's almost always a better choice for you. Because, and this is going to sound a little bit anachronistic or certainly sort of unconventional wisdom, but more customers tend to overbuy this technology than underbuy it. In other words, they're trying to sort of skate where they think the puck is going, but they often don't have the development resources and chops and sophistication to actually wrestle with successfully some of these big complicated platforms. And so instead of becoming more flexible and faster, they become less agile by overbuying the technology. So although core media, Adobe, SDL, Sitecore, Drupal, Contentful, Episerver, some of these more complicated systems are very popular right now. We also see them more often than not very much underexploited as well by their customers. So, a number of issues come up here when we're looking at this. One is that, that everybody, of course, would like to be doing more targeted content segmentation or even personalization. There's a tremendous business case for this. Of course, it also requires that you have a fairly sophisticated content strategy and the ability to actually execute on that strategy. But then it also takes some skills and some savvy and some experience and a lot of testing to actually get this to work. So this is one of the areas where the tools may demo very well, but you've got to be clear about whether you actually have the internal capacity to exploit it. And similarly, with more power also becomes more complex user interfaces. And so you need to be clear about being able to build a cadre of people who are real digital experts as opposed to part-time web publishers if you're going to be using some of the more complicated systems that are out there. So let's turn over to sort of the bigger picture here, which is sort of WCM in a broader sort of customer-centric digital engagement model. So this is our customer-oriented reference model for digital. And the customer being at the center of the circle, and of course they have a variety of journeys, which are the blue part, and then those are supported by business platforms in gray, and then wrapped with enterprise services in purple. So we could spend a whole half hour just on this chart. The point that I'm making here is that over on the left we have content and experience management, which we're talking about today, but a number of these other channels through which customers are going to discover, belong, and transact with you, a lot of these other blue areas also require digital content as well. For campaign and lead management, social engagement, customer support, e-commerce, obviously digital media asset management increasingly important. So you need to be thinking about WCM not just in terms of delivering informational websites, but being able to deliver content into other environments. And so this has made the case for, in an architectural context, this whole notion of potentially a headless WCM. And so this is a very hot topic right now. In our research, we've been looking at what are some of the key practical issues that come to the fore here in terms of, how do you actually track things like preview? How do you know where the content's being used? How can I control from the CMS the actual end user experience if it's being delivered by another application? These are some really critical considerations here. So we're very much in favor of the whole headless, or we would say head optional approach, but you also need to understand the implications of it, particularly for your editors and marketers. And then, of course, there's the related issue of cloud. So the good news is, with respect to WCM, you have a variety of choices. You can use some that were built right within Amazon in an infrastructure as a service environment. There's more and more options for multi-tenant software as a service. Tends to be less popular than single-tenant deployment of these systems in a PaaS environment, which we see much more frequently. And I think a lot of that has to do with enterprises still wanting to have more control and flexibility and actually customization of these platforms, which are really customization environments, extensible environments. And so we tend to see more single tenant in the cloud for WCM, but the point is here that you have a lot of choices, and of course you want to understand the different implications of the choice that you're making, and in particular, who's going to be actually managing the service and managing your relationship with the cloud provider. In our WCM research, we have several evaluation criteria around this that we wrap up under the general term of cloudability, and it's quite interesting to see sort of which tools have been really aggressive about providing you with a lot of different options here, which ones have been a little bit slower. Okay, so now you need to actually decide, all right, we're going to replace our WCM or implement the WCM package for the first time. How do we go about doing this? And in the past, we've seen at least four different approaches to this. The first one is what we call the horse race approach, and so that gets us to these kind of waves and quadrants and such that sort of declare that one vendor is ahead of the other and is intrinsically better than the other and is winning the race. And that's simply a fallacy. There's a time and a place for all of those 35-odd tools, or almost all of them. The question is, what's the right fit for you, for your unique environment? And I'm going to show you in a moment a good way to do that and to think about that. The second one is love at first sight, and of course vendors love this. You can see some really slick demos of Sitecore, Adobe, Acquia, and others, and we see people just literally falling in love with it. The thing you have to understand is that the way you would actually use it is often quite different than what's going to happen in the demo. So, you really need to test it head-to-head compared to others. The third one is what we call My Cousin Vinny, and we see this a lot in higher ed and public sector, which is that somebody that I know uses WordPress and they like it, therefore it's going to be very good for me. Now, of course, you do want to get some peer input into your decision. That can be very useful, but you have to remember that your organization is likely to be different than some of your peers. In fact, you may even differentiate for competitive reasons in a number of different ways. So just because someone else was successful with WordPress doesn't necessarily mean that you will be. The fourth one we see quite often, in some ways can be the most pernicious, and we describe this as happiness as a stack of warm requirements binders. So the idea here is that you just build more and more and more requirements and spreadsheets and linking them all and creating this massive, almost mathematical superstructure of requirements, and then using that to then measure the vendors. And usually what we find is that this actually slows you down and ends up being more complicated and doesn't necessarily lead you to the right solution. In fact, it usually leads you to the more complicated solution, which is often not the best one for you. So what we suggest is what we describe as a more agile approach. So a more agile approach to selection is going to be more iterative, it's going to be more test-based, it's going to be more adaptive, it's certainly going to be empirical, and above all, it's going to be team-based. So the first thing you want to do is build an interdisciplinary selection team. Make sure that you have authors, editors, marketers, system administration, developers, product managers, whoever the key constituents are, together working on the same page. And of course, that team needs a team leader, not just a project manager, but somebody who can actually lead them in an effective empirical decision-making process. And from there, it's really all about fit. So it's not what's the best CMS, it's like what's the best fit for you. And there's going to be a number of ways that you're going to look at this, and you're going to want to examine the trade-offs here. One is kind of business or scenario fit. Clearly, technology fit is important. Partner fit, since you'll likely spend more money on the actual implementation than the software itself. And then at the end of the day, of course, value. There's a good value for your money. And this is an increasing area of interest for us in our research in terms of the total cost of ownership relative to the actual value delivered. And I think, particularly in the WCM sector, in the last several years, there's been some real disappointment around that that I'll get into a little bit later. But the idea here is that this is really all about fit. Now, the temptation at this point is then just to jump down to features. And here's a list of features that we look at when we're examining WCM tools. But the reality is I'm not going to linger too long on this. Yes, these features are important. Not every tool should have all these features. You don't necessarily want a lot of sophistication in some of these areas. This is just a universe of things, services that a WCM tool might provide. That doesn't mean that you may need all of these or that you may need them all in the same degree of weighting. It's just useful to understand, okay, this is how the technology works. What you want to avoid, though, is taking these features type approach and then immediately putting them out in spreadsheets and asking the vendors, do you do this, do you do that? The vendors have seen all the spreadsheets, they can check all the boxes, they've got answers to it. The key is not what features the tool has, it's how it works and what are the scenarios that it targets. And so what we recommend is a more scenario-based approach, which fits in neatly with a nice agile adaptive methodology. So let me just show you an example here of what I mean by that. I'm going to go over to our real-time shortlist generator at Real Story Group here, and we're on the web content and experience management. And we're going to just go through this simple tool exercise here. Technology preference, I'm going to leave that open, all license types. There's some basic things that you may want to circumscribe here, maybe limit my choices to the EMEA region because maybe I'm headquartered in the Netherlands. And then the key thing here is really selecting the scenarios. What are some of the key things that we're going to need to do? We've got microsites and landing pages, we're a global enterprise, and we need to do a lot of multi-channel publishing. We're more around basic digital marketing than say, advanced marketing portal. So here are 4 different scenarios that we need to be able to support. I'm not going to really talk much about the digital workplace for this particular scope, but this is just an enterprise kind of self-defining what they need. And so the point here is that then a whole variety of different vendors can potentially solve some of these. What's interesting is you can see that there's probably no single vendor that executes really well across all 4 scenarios. So this particular customer is going to face some trade-offs here. But in any case, I can output some of this stuff as images or PowerPoint or Excel and then play with it. But the point is here that I'm taking more of a scenario or business usage-based approach as opposed to just doing checklists, right? And now in our research across all of our different streams, we have our own generic canonical scenarios that we use. But the key thing for you when you're going to selection is to try to generate some of your own. And so we describe these as testable narratives. And there's a science to this, but also an art as well. And the point is that these are specific user journeys. And the users could be developers, designers, editors, marketers, and of course your actual visitors and customers or employees or whoever's accessing the site. And you develop these journeys and see how well the different CMS tools on your short list match up. And you'll see that many of them can do the same thing, but it's the way that they do it. It's how. It's what really matters more. And so you go through what we describe as an agile, testable process. So, you may come up with the longest short list. We're big believers in research. Of course, we have a vested interest in that because that's what we do for a living is provide detailed research on these vendors. But you could use research to then get down to a short list of RFP recipients, maybe 6 to 8. Then based on their responses, you invite 3 to 4 into demos. Now, the key thing about the RFP and the demos are that rather than doing generic sort of demos, they're actually demoing your use cases. The use cases that you develop, the scenarios that make sense for your business. So they come in, do custom demos. Then always, always, always we recommend doing a bake-off or a proof of concept where you're testing 2 of them head-to-head. And the difference between these and the demos is you actually want to get hands-on with the tools. So that may take 3 days, a week. We've certainly seen them go as long as 2 or 3 weeks for much more complicated implementations. But the key thing is to get trained and to actually test the tools and have your different personas within your organization, actually try before you buy. And it's amazing how we see often in multi-million-dollar deals, enterprises making decisions without trying it first. Now, the key thing here, too, is really to try to do this with two different vendors. You'll become a lot smarter, you'll reduce your risks, and at the end of it, you may have some working prototypes, which means that you can then, once you decide which vendor to go with, you can get into production on some sort of a pilot all that much faster. Then the other consideration here is what we call strategic considerations. These are different vendor intangibles around not just the vendor itself, its professional services and tech support, but what does the customer environment look like? What does their service partners look like? The customer community, we find, is increasingly important to longevity and reliability and stability of the technology. How well do they partner with other software vendors? And there's a cloud story here too, because you may find different cloud options with respect to deployment from the vendor, from partners, from services, maybe your own cloud environment. And so there's a lot of sort of strategic considerations to take into account here. This has certainly been an area in our research where we're paying greater and greater attention to with each passing year. It's not just the technology that matters, and at the end of the day, it's not just the vendor that matters, it's the whole ecosystem around either the commercial product or the open source platform. So if you're interested to learn more, I invite you to sample our research, get a free chapter, which is the HP Now Open Text team site chapter, to download it from our website and see just how we evaluate these tools. If you have any questions, certainly you can ping us about it. I think the other thing that is worth doing is sort of just understanding how ready are you for this sort of a project. Where are you as far as your organizational effectiveness, your digital capabilities, your system maturity? That you should really consider, baselining where you're at. And you can use our tools at RealScore. You can find other ways of doing this. But the key thing is, sort of a digital leader, know thyself, know thy organization, so that you can understand what is realistic with respect to WCM technology to take you forward to the next level. I'm going to leave you with this. Don't just operate on a wing and a prayer. Take an agile, empirical, research-based approach to vetting your choices, and then the key thing is to get hands-on on any system, ideally in a competitive environment, a bake-off, before you sign on the dotted line. So that's the message that I'd like to leave you with. Happy to take some more questions and comments. Already some have been coming in. If you've got more questions or comments, feel free to type them into the GoToMeeting control panel. This is how we can stay in touch going forward. And once again, I encourage you to download a sample report from our website and check out RealScore. But for now, we will be getting to your questions. So Jeff is asking about the slide deck and replay. And Jeff, the answer is that you all get a copy of the slide deck, and those of you who are RealStory Group subscribers will have on-demand access to the complete replay. Brad is saying you need to add training and access rights for IT, and training is really critical for these sorts of tools. I think particularly as the complexity has gone up. Beyond training, I think I would also add, Brad, education. Like, what are we using this for? What are the circumstances? What are actual good practices? Where do our business and editorial marketing processes need to be more collaborative as opposed to more sort of process-oriented and that sort of thing? Brad's also recommending that you always ask a vendor for a map of the development over the next 2 or 3 years. Absolutely. The roadmap is really critical. And it's interesting, there's a couple dimensions to this, too, that when we're doing our evaluation. One is the actual product roadmap, which is very interesting in and of its own sense, because it sort of suggests where the vendor sees the market going and who are the true customers that they're actually trying to meet. But the other thing is the vendor's roadmap, the organizational roadmap. Where is the vendor going, and how does this product fit into all the other products that they're deploying? Is it a small fish in their pond? Is it the main thing that they do? Are they changing their model? Are they evolving their model with their orientation towards cloud? So there's a couple of different roadmaps, but you're absolutely right, Brad. It's a key thing to look at. And there's another question here about dual purpose systems that say they're a DAM and a CMS at the same time. This is really interesting because we're seeing this both on the DAM side, where we're seeing vendors build in more support for unstructured narrative content and Notion's publishing out microsite, and also on the WCM side, where we're seeing vendors like Core Media and SDL and others build full-blown DAM capabilities into their CMS. And I think both are promising. The key thing you need to understand is, when does the built-in DAM for your CMS, when will it suffice, and when do you need something above and beyond that? And so what we typically counsel, particularly for larger enterprises, is it's great to have sophisticated image and video management capabilities right within your CMS, but there may come a time when you need to have a separate media layer beneath it, in which case integration with your CMS becomes a really critical point. So we've got another question here about SharePoint. In SharePoint 2016, what happened to WCM? Well, very interesting. SharePoint 2016, despite some promises from Redmond, really doesn't provide a big upgrade in terms of web publishing capabilities. There are other capabilities that have been enhanced in 2016, but I think that Redmond has sort of given up a little bit on the WCM use case, and I think that they just don't consider it particularly important. I think more generally in SharePoint, they don't really see it as a marketing platform. They see it as an employee and partner engagement and collaboration platform and portal, as more of an enterprise tool rather than a marketing tool. And I think it's revealing that they removed the WCM capabilities from Office 365, so you can't really use that as a web publishing platform anymore. So I don't know where Microsoft is going. I'm not sure Microsoft is clear where it's going. I don't begrudge them the choices that they made, because I think that they concluded at the end of the day that this was not a terribly large market. What I do begrudge is that there are sometimes Microsoft consultants or Microsoft-oriented channel consultants who will tell you that you can and should use SharePoint for public-facing websites. And it's very, very rare are the circumstances where SharePoint is a good fit for you for public-facing or marketing-oriented sites. I would say almost never. And 2016 fundamentally doesn't change that calculation. Okay, so we've wrapped up on our half hour. I'll point you to that little subway map that's in the background there and let you know that our next webinar is going to be on July 15th, and we're going to interpret the new 2016 version of the subway map. So that's going to be a lot of fun, but also I think very educational. You can sign up on our website at realstorygroup.com. And until then, this is Tony Byrne. Thanks very much for joining you, and looking forward to staying in touch.